Hi, I'm Yuri Kazepov, Professor of Urban Sociology at the Faculty of Social Sciences, where I conduct research on multi-level governance, social inequalities, and eco-social transitions. One focus of my research is sustainability in both social and environmental terms, particularly the relationship between policies in the two domains. This relationship is the topic of today's video, where I will address the following questions. How and why does climate change affect disproportionately socially vulnerable groups? Do environmental policies reinforce this output? How can social policies help mitigate the unequal outputs of environmental policies? Answering these questions is crucial for designing policies that foster both social equity and environmental sustainability across all levels of governance. While I won't provide full-fledged answers, I will illustrate the complexity behind these processes through two examples. I conclude by highlighting the importance of integrating social and environmental policies to govern the challenges of eco-social transitions. The key takeaway is that addressing these processes involves tackling the inequality patterns that emerge from socio-ecological transformations, as pollution and environmental hazards are not evenly distributed in society. I'm coming to my first question. How does climate change affect socially vulnerable populations and why? Research has shown that climate change exacerbates existing social inequality by disproportionately impacting vulnerable populations. These groups, often defined by socioeconomic and racial indicators, typically live in areas which are more exposed to environmental hazards, have less access to resources and services, and possess limited capacity to adapt to changes. Consequently, policies are essential to mitigate these disparities and promote social equity in the face of environmental challenges. One concrete example, Hurricane Katrina. In 2005, this hurricane hit New Orleans, Louisiana, becoming one of the deadliest in history with over 1,300 fatalities. The impact on the Afro-American population and other vulnerable communities was disproportionately high. For instance, they were more affected by evacuation barriers due to lacking access to transportation and financial resources to secure accommodations away from the storm. They were displaced for longer periods, with only 5% back in their homes 1 month after the storm, in contrast to more than 60% of the better-off mainly white population. Black workers from New Orleans were 4 times more likely to lose their jobs compared to their white counterparts. Stress and mental health issues were much higher among Black communities compared to white ones. Overall, Hurricane Katrina exacerbated existing social inequalities, highlighting that environmental hazards affect some social groups more than others. Social and environmental policies could have mitigated the impact of a hurricane through nature-based solutions and resources to face or even prevent the negative impacts of a disaster. However, the lack of infrastructural and redistributive social policies, more characteristic of the US than European countries, affected the resilience and the ability of specific communities to address the consequences of a hurricane. Coming now to my second question, how can environmental policies have a negative effect on social vulnerable groups? I will answer this question illustrating the concept of green gentrification. Green gentrification refers to the process where environmental improvements, such as creating parks or green spaces, lead to unintended consequences like increased property value, the displacement of lower-income residents. Essentially, as a neighborhood becomes greener and more attractive, in particular within a market-regulated housing sector, wealthier individuals move in, driving up rents and pushing out existing residents. Social policies in general, and housing policies more specifically, are potentially able to contrast these negative effects, preventing or mitigating green gentrification and the displacement it causes. How? For instance, through social housing policies, ensuring that a significant portion of the housing stock remains affordable and regulated, preventing in this way displacement. Or through rent control and tenant protection, thereby providing more stable housing conditions and preventing the negative effects of market speculation. Or through zoning regulations that prioritize the development of affordable housing alongside green spaces aimed at creating mixed-income neighborhoods. Or through community engagement and participation, involving local communities in the planning and implementation of greening projects. The synergy of these policies can mitigate or even prevent the displacement of more vulnerable groups, reducing the housing market pressure caused by greening policies. Comparative research has shown that Vienna is well positioned in this task. For instance, through the fact that Vienna owns directly 220,000 flats in the city and subsidizes another 200,000, which summed up in 43% of the total housing stock, almost a record in Europe. Or for the fact that in 2018, Vienna introduced a new zoning rule that requires that in developments with more than 5,000 square meters of living space, 2/3 must be subsidized housing. Or through tenants' protection laws and rent control that make it difficult to evict people and provide stability on the housing market. In synthesis, Vienna's active social housing strategy significantly limits displacement options and the pressure of green projects on housing costs. More than 60% of the Viennese population lives in social housing, and greening projects are often coupled with affordable housing developments. By integrating social and environmental policies, the city achieves a high level of social equity and environmental sustainability. This brings me to the third and last question. How can social policies help mitigate the unequal outcomes of environmental policies? The two examples provided show the importance of integrating social and environmental policies. Addressing climate change, reducing biodiversity loss, and managing pollution should not overlook the social consequences of environmental policies on the most vulnerable groups. Integrating such policies can lead to more encompassing solutions that distribute the cost of the eco-social transition in a more just way. However, several challenges exist. I will highlight just a few of them. First, policy fragmentation. Historically, social and environmental policies have been developed in silos, leading to conflicting objectives and inefficiencies. Second, resource allocation. Balancing limited resources between social and environmental needs is a significant challenge. Prioritizing one can sometimes lead to the neglect of the other, producing trade-offs. Third, political and institutional barriers. Integrating these policies requires coordination across various levels of government and sectors, which can be hindered by bureaucratic inertia and conflicting interests. In synthesis, governing the eco-social transition requires addressing the complex interplay between social and environmental policies to develop governance structures that support a just and sustainable transition.